For weeks, the breathing came at the same time every night, a wet, patient sound that seeped through the thin seam of darkness beneath my closet door. At first, it barely registered. The way small noises never do when you're half asleep and your mind is busy inventing reasons not to wake all the way. Old buildings breathe, I told myself. Pipes expand, wood contracts. The wind tests every crack like curious fingers. The explanation felt reasonable, and reasonable things are comforting. I lay in bed and listened just long enough to convince myself it was nothing, then rolled over and let sleep reclaim me. But even then, in the moments before I drifted off, I would feel watched. As though something on the other side of the wall was listening to me. Listen. The apartment had its share of quirks. It was cheap for the neighborhood, which should have warned me, and the landlord had been eager in a way that suggested he wanted anyone living there as quickly as possible. The building itself was old brick, narrow hallways and doors that never quite aligned with their frames. My closet was a shallow thing, just deep enough for hanging coats and a few boxes stacked against the back wall. I'd noticed a panel there once, a rectangle of wood that looked newer than the rest, but I assumed it was covering some ancient repair or a disused access point for wiring. The first week I moved in, I barely gave it a thought. The breathing grew louder with time. It took on a rhythm that was undeniably human. Inhale, a slight hitch, then a slow exhale that sounded almost content. Once I woke to the unmistakable sensation that it was synchronized with my own, as if whatever was behind that door was matching me breath for breath. That night, my heart pounded so hard I was sure it could be heard through the walls. I lay frozen, staring at the closet, my eyes tracing the faint outline of the door in the moonlight. When I finally worked up the nerve to sit up and listen more closely, the sound stopped. The silence that followed was worse. It felt deliberate, like a held breath. During the day, I tried to laugh it off. I went to work, answered emails, drank too much coffee. I told a coworker about the noise and she joked about ghosts, and I laughed along. But the idea lodged somewhere deep and refused to leave. At night, I started leaving the closet light on, the door ajar just enough to convince myself there was nothing inside. The breathing continued anyway, now muffled by the light hum of the bulb, as though it were farther back than the clothes, deeper than the wall itself. Sometimes it came with other sounds, a faint scrape, a whisper of fabric shifting, the soft click of something metallic brushing against wood. By the third week, sleep deprivation had sharpened everything into a brittle edge. I was jumpy, irritable, constantly on the verge of panic. One night, when the breathing started up again, I grabbed my phone and turned on the flashlight, sweeping the beam across the closet. Coats swayed gently, stirred by air I couldn't feel. The back wall remained stubbornly solid, the panel blending into the rest of the wood. The breathing didn't stop. If anything, it seemed amused, as though my fear was entertaining. That was when the thought occurred to me that still makes my stomach twist. Whatever it was, it knew I was there. It knew I was listening. The idea of recording it came from desperation more than logic. I needed proof, something tangible I could point to and say, "See, this is real." The next night, I set my phone on the nightstand with the voice recorder app open and waited. The breathing began almost immediately, louder than ever, filling the small bedroom with its damp cadence. I lay still, barely daring to breathe myself, afraid that any movement would alert it. The sound went on for hours, or maybe minutes. Time blurred until everything felt unreal. At some point I must have fallen asleep, because I woke to the pale light of morning and the blessed absence of noise. My hands shook as I played back the recording over breakfast. At first, it was just static and my own breathing, uneven and fast. Then the other breathing emerged, unmistakable now that I was fully awake. It was closer than I remembered. So close it sounded like it was right next to the microphone. I felt a grim sense of vindication bloom in my chest. I wasn't imagining it. I wasn't losing my mind. I leaned closer to the speaker, turning up the volume. And that was when I heard the whisper. A man's voice, low and intimate, threaded through the sound like a secret shared in the dark. He finally noticed me. It said, with a faint chuckle that raised the hair on my arms. I dropped the phone as if it had burned me. The clatter against the table echoed through the apartment, loud and accusatory. For a long moment, I just stared at it, my pulse roaring in my ears. The words replayed themselves in my head, each repetition more horrifying than the last. He finally noticed me. The implication was clear and chilling. Whatever was behind that wall had been there long before I ever thought to listen. It had been waiting. The breathing hadn't been an accident. It had been an invitation. Calling the police felt surreal, like something that happened to other people on the news. I tried to explain the situation calmly, but my voice kept breaking. the words tumbling over each other in my haste to be believed. To my relief, they took me seriously, at least enough to send 2 officers to check things out. They arrived mid-morning, filling the apartment with the reassuring weight of uniforms and authority. I showed them the recording. Watching their expressions shift from polite skepticism to something closer to concern as the whisper played, one of them frowned and asked about the neighboring unit. When I told him it had been empty for 6 months, he exchanged a glance with his partner. They searched the apartment thoroughly, opening doors, checking windows, even peering into the closet with flashlights drawn. Standing there with them, in the full light of day, the space looked absurdly ordinary. Just coats and boxers and that innocuous panel on the back wall. No breathing, no whispers. I felt foolish all over again, like a child afraid of monsters under the bed. One of the officers suggested it might be a shared ventilation issue, sound traveling through old ductwork. Another asked if I'd been under a lot of stress lately. I nodded, mortified, certain they were already writing me off. It was the younger officer who noticed the panel. He ran his fingers along its edges, frowning at the way it didn't quite match the surrounding wood. "This looks newer," he said, more to himself than to us. He knocked on it lightly, then harder. The sound it made was wrong hollow, not solid like the rest of the wall. My heart leaped into my throat. The older officer sighed and shrugged, clearly expecting nothing. But he nodded and reached for his radio to call for permission. Minutes later, with my landlord's begrudging consent, they pried the panel loose. Behind it was a small, jagged hole, just big enough for a face to peer through. The edges were splintered, the wood chewed away over time, and beyond it was darkness. The smell hit us first, a stale, human odor, like sweat and rot trapped in a sealed space. The officers stiffened, weapons drawn now, and shone their lights through the opening. On the other side was the neighboring apartment, just as I'd been told. Empty, unfurnished, a hollow shell coated in dust. But the wall opposite the hole was scuffed and scratched, the floor beneath it worn down as if someone had stood there for hours on end. They found more evidence as they searched. Food wrappers stuffed behind a radiator, a nest of blankets in the corner, a plastic bottle fashioned into a crude funnel. Someone had been living there, quietly, invisibly, watching. The realization settled over me like a suffocating blanket. The breathing hadn't come from the pipes or the wind. It had come from a man standing inches away, separated from me by nothing but a thin wall and my own willful ignorance. He had listened to me sleep, to me talk on the phone, to me move through my life unaware. The police called for backup, their voices tight with urgency. I sat on my couch, numb, as strangers in gloves and masks combed through the adjacent unit. They found the hole enlarged from the other side, carefully smoothed to avoid splinters. They found a cheap recorder identical to mine, batteries dead, tucked into the blankets. They found notes scribbled on scraps of paper, observations about my routine, my habits, my fears. I didn't read them, couldn't bring myself to. Knowing he had watched was already too much. Knowing how closely felt like an invasion I would never recover from. They never found him. By the time they arrived, he was gone, slipping away through the maze of empty units and forgotten access points that riddled the building. The landlord swore ignorance, his face pale as he assured everyone that the vacancy had been secure, that he'd checked it himself. I didn't believe him. I didn't believe anyone. The officers advised me to stay elsewhere for a while, to let them increase patrols and follow up on leads. They took the recording, promising to keep me informed. When they left, the apartment felt cavernous and hostile, every shadow a threat. I moved out that day, packed a bag, grabbed my essentials, and didn't look back. Friends let me crash on their couches, their spare rooms, and I tried to explain without sounding hysterical. At night, in unfamiliar beds, I still listened for breathing. My body primed for fear. Sometimes I thought I heard it, a phantom sound born of trauma, and my heart would race until reason reasserted itself. The police called weeks later to tell me they had no leads. Transients, they said. Urban explorers. Someone who slipped through the cracks. The case would remain open, but they weren't hopeful. Months have passed now. I live in a new place, newer building, solid walls. I've checked every closet, every panel, every inch of space. I sleep with white noise and the lights off, determined not to let fear dictate my life. Most nights it works, but sometimes, when the world is quiet and my thoughts wander, I remember the whisper on the recording, the intimacy of it, the certainty in that voice. He finally noticed me. The words linger like a promise, unfulfilled, and I can't help but wonder, with a cold twist of dread, if noticing was all he ever wanted or if it was just the beginning.